I'm your host Neil Langridge, and I'm joined today by Deryck Mitchelson, Field CISO at the Cybersecurity Pioneers Checkpoint. Artificial intelligence is the subject you can't avoid in tech right now. I discuss this hot topic, exploring the impact of AI on cybersecurity, what the future might hold, and whether we really should be worried about Skynet. Hi everybody, I'm Neil Langridge and welcome to the latest edition of Return of the Hack, the podcast from E92+. I'm joined today by our guest Deryck Mitchelson, who's the Field CISO at Checkpoint. Hi Deryck, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, and also thank you for inviting me on. Been looking forward to this all week. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, it's brilliant, lovely for you to join us. And we're going to finally address one of those big topics in cybersecurity and technology generally right now, which is AI, artificial intelligence. And there's always so much chat, there's been plenty of blogs, there's been a lot written about it, and invariably on lots of these you get to the end and somebody has written to say, aha, it's all been written by AI or ChatGPT at the bottom. But I think we can definitely both confirm that we are humans involved in this conversation, Deryck.
Absolutely no artificial intelligence. The only intelligence will actually be, I guess, me and you in real. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, we'll test that. So let's kick off with a nice, simple, easy one to begin with. I suppose, is AI all going to come and destroy us?
I hope not, and I don't expect that it will. But like all technologies, we need to understand what the impact of the technology is. We also need to understand what the guardrails or regulations are that we can put around this. I think that's important. The development maturity of AI is incredible. It's learning all the time, it's evolving all the time. And if you ask the experts, very much they're saying it will evolve to the point that there's quickly got more intelligence than humans, than those that are trying to manage it. So that's where the concern comes from, definitely. But I would like to think in my lifetime, in my children's lifetime, that we won't be in a world that's controlled by AI. We'll be in a world where AI helps us, makes it a better world for us, but you just never know.
No, well, hopefully no cybersecurity vendor's going to end up kind of taking the plunge and calling one of their products Skynet or anything too much like that, so we can all keep ourselves kind of a little bit controlled. But I think certainly, since in my time in cybersecurity, it'd be interesting to hear your perspective. I haven't seen anything accelerate in terms of its development and uptake in quite the way AI has over the last kind of 6 to 12 months, especially from not just in terms of the technology itself, but people's understanding and interaction of it. I mean, you certainly get technologies come and they get exciting, but that might be kind of, under the hood, underneath products where people don't necessarily see them. But, when it's a case of kind of 12-year-olds being able to start using ChatGPT to start using for their homework, and it's come so far in such a short space of months. That rate of change is something that's a challenge for everybody, I suppose, especially you in the security industry, trying to understand how best to use it, and also at the same time trying to counterthink how adversaries are potentially using it.
We were already fighting a war where hackers, threat actors were using AI. It's just the way it's evolved in the last few months that suddenly it now understands. It understands the hack. It understands how it should be getting used in order to cause damage or cause chaos. And that's the concern as cyber professionals, that we're looking to build offensive AI capabilities into our systems so that we can defend against it, proactively defend. But at the same time, threat actors have got the same APIs. They have got the same access to the tooling that we have got. So they're trying to use it for criminal purposes, and that's quite a dangerous place to be.
It is, I suppose, kind of typically I was going to ask kind of if it's a little bit of an arms race in this case, but I suppose it's a little bit different, that it's not about kind of new technology, new investment. It's understanding how to use this technology, because you're not adding on features, you're not building better hardware. What you're doing is kind of, helping teach the technology to learn more and become smarter. So I suppose it's a different sort of arms race than potentially we've seen before from a cybersecurity perspective.
Yes, absolutely. But already we're seeing that the threat actors are using it in criminal ways, specifically around code development. So that's development of malware and spear phishing as well. Spear phishing in particularly playing on the sort of things that we all respond to. So it's less the stereotypical Nigerian prince that's mailing you to say, I've got £1 trillion, please help me get the money out of my country. It's
I,
now
I've still not got that yacht yet either, Derek. I've been promised it so many times.
it's now more playing on things like we've seen something abnormal within your scan result. So please click on this
Yeah.
link to create an appointment with a consultant. Now that's the sort of thing that plays on people's fears. Everybody jumps quickly at that. Most people look at the spam email that comes in and goes, that's a nonsense. I don't know any Nigerian prince. But it's different when they actually start to target, and it starts to understand who you are, understands your persona, so you can really create targeted phishing emails that are very, very convincing, as one thing. And the other thing we're seeing, obviously, as well, is a whole lot of deep fakes. So, analysing voices, analysing videos. It's, you were right at the start to say we are two humans interacting, but it won't be very long but to get to the point where you might not know that you are interacting with a human. How would you know? On a telephone call, how would you actually know who you're interacting with? I'm thinking a couple of years ago, I was talking a lot about the metaverse and what the metaverse might mean for how we all work and who you're actually meeting in the metaverse. Would you be engaging in it? Would you be doing your commercials and contracts? And how do you know who you're interacting with? Add AI to that, and the whole thing just opens up. It becomes a minefield of, I guess, identity. Identity is the tenet of security, but getting that identity right at the moment is even more critical.
And I suppose that's kind of one of the scary things about it, in a way, that it's beginning to undermine some of those technologies that we have that are effectively how we deploy cybersecurity and how we verify identity. So we talk about kind of things like deep fakes. Multi-factor authentication is kind of one of those kind of key parts in terms of what we do. Access to personal information, personal questions, and even our own, from a multi-factor, it can be kind of who we are, and that can be touch and what have you, and it can be our fingerprints, but it can also be our face. So if the technology can start doing, I suppose, 3D modeling of our face, then that's beginning to undermine some of those kind of foundation points of cybersecurity.
Well, we know in the early stages that you were able to open up mobile phones by, taking pictures, putting pictures in. The technology has improved since then, but now the AI is actually improving that as well. Yes, I very much fear that where does that stop? I mean, it's facial recognition is what we're using for a lot of technology, so I expect connecting up AI to 3D printers. It's not far-fetched, Neil, to suggest that we're going to be creating realistic 3D images of people with realistic voices at the back. That's not Skynet. That's the world that we're actually living in now.
Yeah, and obviously there are kind of potentially practical and really positive benefits for that as well. And I suppose it's kind of just touching on one of the things you kind of mentioned earlier around those guardrails and the regulation. And it's been interesting, I think, kind of, a lot of organisations that benefit in a certain commercial area, not just necessarily technology, but or whether it's kind of utilities or whatever it happens to be, aren't always keen on regulation, because that can potentially be seen as an inhibitor to their kind of business success. But already we're seeing organisations involved in AI calling for a bit of a slowdown, a bit of a halt, more regulation for us to be able to get a handle on it. The problem is the bad guys don't really care about that. So, kind of, what are the challenges around kind of increased regulation, where that can bring some benefits, but where there are kind of potential challenges to that coming in that could impact how we defend against it in a way that the bad actors won't experience the same issues.
I think, first of all, to say in that I think the reason that those that are managing, owning the AI technology are working quite well and calling for regulation is commercial. I don't actually think they want to work in a world where they're regulated. I think they want to make sure that they're doing everything they can so that they can generate the maximum commercial value from what they're generating. Without being in a regulated world means that there could actually be countries again that stop their technology from being in use. So I think it's for financial gain that those that are calling out for regulation are doing it. Then when you come to professionals like me that come from a risk and data privacy background, we very much are concerned around the ethics, the data privacy, what this actually means around this. But as you saw recently when the EU were trying to bring in some guardrails around AI, in particular Chat GPT, the AI was actually developing and maturing faster than they were able to actually bring in the regulations, and draft regulations were having to change because the AI was maturing at a quicker pace than the lawmakers were able to actually bring in regulations. Now, that says something. I guess what I'd be saying on the basis of that is, is it now too late? Are these laws take ages to come into power, and they go through stages, experts, etc. How can you bring laws in where the AI is actually learning and maturing all the time and changing? I think that's a difficult thing. So as much as I want guardrails and I want regulations, my concern is why were we not talking about these before this actually went live? Why are these technologies now out? Is the cat out of the bag? Potentially it is. And are the regulations always going to be playing catch up? Again, potentially it is, and I think this is what we're going to see. We're going to see cat and mouse of regulations and AI maturity. It's what we're going to see as functions get or capabilities get released. Then I expect we're going to have to see an iteration of the regulations where they catch up, because very much we are the guinea pigs of the AI at the moment. We're the ones that are using it. We're the ones that are helping it learn. And as we do that, it's as I said earlier, it just continues to evolve and to learn, and it's very difficult to regulate something like that. Never seen anything like this before. Never seen it.
Yeah, and we're very much learning on the job and having to make it up as we go on. I suppose does that mean that there's a greater requirement on technology companies to effectively help frame, kind of best practice, and if not kind of official government legislation, then at least some kind of, agreed controls as to how this is used as much as kind of, as well and as ethically as possible.
I think this needs to be, the regulations and the guardrails need to be owned not by the technology companies, not by the governments either, because as I say, I think you'll find some of these have got commercial gains
Yeah.
from what they're actually working together. And an example of that, if you have a look at the large cloud that's been built by the Pentagon at the moment, they gave a very large contract in the last year to Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and yeah, and on the basis of what they've actually done, and this is actually to create some defence capabilities. So those that have got the most advancement in AI are actually those that are getting large contracts with governments, with defence agencies, etc. So we need to be very careful around who's actually going to be owning these guardrails. I go back to my time in the NHS, Neil, where when we were building out the COVID response for Scotland, so we were building how we were doing contact tracing applications, how we would do applications for doing proximity tests and for actually looking at the status of your COVID status. And what we found on the back of that was that the best way of getting these things in was to actually be working with the ethics groups. So it was actually working with the softer groups, not the governments, that was critical there. They were the ones that could represent the people, the consumers, how we were going to use that technology. And that's much more what I think we're needing to have in AI. We're needing to have not the technology experts driving what we're doing or the government. I think we're needing to actually have a lot of these ethical groups, within the UK, the ICO, organisations that can really take this forward and look after the consumer rather than looking after the commercialisation. I think that's the critical bit. That could be the tipping point.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it kind of seems to have got lost a little bit in recent times simply because of the rate of change. But certainly, kind of in the kind of the kind of few years leading up to this, when there was a lot of talk about use of AI and machine learning in terms of certain kind of, and building algorithms, whether it's kind of things like kind of facial recognition used by law enforcement, there were real concerns around how we build these technologies and building in things like kind of bias and stereotypes and what have you. So I think is that another area where we it's kind of the cat isn't out the bag, but there is a kind of a lack of control, and that's something that needs to be kind of brought back in and taken aware of.
I agree. I mean, how do we measure the prejudice of AI? In
Yeah.
workplaces, we go through unconscious bias training as to, we're all biased in a way, even though we don't realise we are, and it's trying to make sure we're not. How does that get built into the AI models, and who actually then polices that to actually say that what it's doing or what it's learning, is it learning the right things? How do we model that properly? There's a definite concern around there. That was a concern when I often comment on the facial recognition, as to a lot of these
Yeah.
technologies tend to be more biased in some of our ethnical groups. And, I know there's been some concern around things like AI on what it might do for those that have got mental health issues, or those that might be suicidal, that as to how it actually caters with these. So I think there's a huge concern around our vulnerable groups and how we do it, which again is why I'm saying I think this needs to be policed not by governments, by ethical bodies, in order to make sure that this cannot be in any way harming our minors, our most vulnerable in society. That's essential for me.
Yeah, and I suppose that's definitely one of those areas where you hope that, I think as a technology industry, we need to make sure that we're coming together, and the use of our own kind of AI in the tools is kind of, is really important in terms of being able to protect those groups. So I suppose it'd be interesting to kind of talk a little bit in terms of not just in terms of AI used by bad actors, but by the good guys, by the organisations in cybersecurity like Checkpoint. Kind of, how can it, with this current rate of change, how can it be used as effectively as possible? Where does AI fit into not in terms of the product portfolio, but in terms of how it powers some of these products to be able to defend as effectively as possible?
I expect that first thing it will do is you'll start to see a huge maturity within the user behaviour modelling. So, it will really start to understand what good looks like, what normal looks like, what abnormal looks like. So it will definitely look to do that. It'll also be far quicker when it's looking at security operations capabilities, the things we normally log within a security sim or orchestration and automation, SOAR that sits upon it. I expect AI will start to pick up all the heavy lifting, and of course it will get better and better. It will start to improve, it will reduce the false positives. Hopefully it gets to the point where it can spot 0 days before we know about 0 days. So some of these things are absolutely exciting, but as I said earlier, let's be honest, that the threat actors have got that same capabilities as well. So as we're trying to defend against that, I expect that they'll be using it to more quickly work out where there's vulnerabilities, to actually have a look to see where we could use legitimate tooling, for adverse conditions, etc. So I expect that's what we're looking at. We're looking at a much more AI-driven workforce in that security operations space. And I think that will get changed very quickly. I expect we'll start to see that within the next 3 to 6 months. A lot of AI within that space, vendors bringing out technologies that they're actually talking about AI replacing people. I do expect we'll start to see that. I think the escalations will always be to the senior teams to say, we've now found an anomaly, we think with a great degree of certainty it's a risk. What do you want to do with it? Again, it will start to learn, so it will start to actually learn and then remediate as well. I expect it will change firewall rules, it will close down buckets that are sitting there that are available, it will encrypt things that are sitting unencrypted. So I think, again, back to the guardrails, we need to make sure we give it the guardrails to work on, which will be good. And if I go back to my previous job working in healthcare, absolutely, we want AI to be able to help to personalise health pathways, looking at conditions that we've got, or looking at data from wearables. But at the same time, we don't necessarily want the security in hospitals to be making big changes on the networks, which could have an impact to scanning machines or labs machines. So we need to get that right balance, I think, between automation and between the use cases where we use it.
It's interesting because I think kind of all these discussion points that we're kind of covering, so often it comes back to that central theme, both from a good perspective and a bad perspective, of AI being able to kind of differentiate or struggle to differentiate, or the tools being able to struggle to differentiate between what is a computer and what is a person. So from a good perspective, building AI into cybersecurity technologies means that when an attack is coming in, or there's a potential question mark, or as you say, there's some potential behaviour, is that being able to detect whether it is actually a person who's just made a mistake and done something a little bit different, or detecting whether it's actually a pattern that builds up that it is a potentially an attack. So all of these questions always seem to spin back to the computer versus the people, both in a good way and a bad way.
Yeah, absolutely. But as I say, it's learning so quickly, it's evolving. I think it'll get much better at being able to do that. It will get much better at being able to differentiate between good and bad, between what the right trends are, in order to come up with the right diagnosis of, as I say, either a medical condition, or the diagnosis as to what it's seeing on a network as to whether that's a threat or not. So
Yeah.
It's a great thing that we should embrace, but it does need the guardrails in place in order to make sure that it's doing the right things. I would still want people to be in charge of these things. When you come to conclusions, I'm a believer at the moment that we should be the arbiters of the outcomes. It's great. It's great if it can feed in all the intelligence and say this is where I've got to. But I think we still need these senior decision makers that are the ones that are still making changes, pressing buttons. That's a world I want to be in at the moment. Not this slightly scary world. It's another example. If you think about some of the things that happens on airlines, I know we had that condition before where, if you remember, some of the software was actually causing some of the air crashes, and the pilots were actually fighting against it. It's back to that same thing around, well, the, how do we want the AI to learn? Does the AI learn from simulations, or does it learn better in real-term situations? If it's in real-term situations, what is the impact of these situations, before it learns? We tend to learn from our mistakes. I expect that AI learns a lot from its mistakes as well, but we need to make sure that we're removing the impact of these mistakes, making the learnings as safe as possible.
Yes, yeah, kind of absolutely. I feel like all my references on this are going to end up being films, but I was going to go back to war games from the 80s. At least that was an example where the computer potentially started World War Three, but it did learn in the end. But that AI, I think, is kind of rather significantly less advanced than everything that we have now. I suppose you kind of will touch on another really important point on that investment organizations are making in AI and not replacing humans. I think we want the technology to help us make the most informed, the most accurate decisions possible. And we talk a lot about the skills gap in cyber and potentially technology being able to balance from that. But now what we've started seeing, and it was only this week that we heard about BT making large numbers of cutbacks because they're going to be investing that money in AI and technology, and that kind of feels, the kind of initial impact is that's uncomfortable because we want technology to be able to address that, help us with that skills gap that we have in technology and cyber right now, but not necessarily replacing the people. That seems a really bold step so early in this development that organisations are already potentially looking to replace people with the technology.
I mean, I embrace that to a point. I'll give you a strong example. Checkpoint's got some brilliant AI that sits within its mail security products. And what it does, it's got a fantastically high catch rate at looking at where it's finding business email compromise, where it's finding phishing, where it's finding threats in emails. It's unbelievable. Now, on the back of that, what I normally say when I'm doing C-level talks is you can use that type of AI in order to remove the laborious tasks from your security operations team. They don't want to be sitting there looking at emails. They don't want to be quarantining emails, releasing emails. They want to be doing things that they think are giving really good, strong value back to the business growth or business success. So I think let's focus on the repetitive, mundane type roles, which are important. But if we focus the right way, then the AI can do a lot of that heavy lifting on the roles that ideally people don't want to do. And let's free ourselves up to do that, the roles that are to do with the innovation, the transformation, the roles that are going to underpin how companies actually take on the AI and change and transform. I think that's important, but we do need to again strike the balance. If it does start to replace all your security teams and organisations are saying, oh, we're fully reliant on AI, I wouldn't be comfortable in that world if when I have conversations with customers and they say, "Oh, we don't need any humans anymore because the AI we're getting from Checkpoint is so good, it's preventing everything." Well, I myself would be uncomfortable saying to them, "That's where I'd want to be." It needs to be a balance, but it's for companies themselves to, I think, to work out that balance. Also, working out the messaging. The messaging is important. Too often you just see headlines which is there's going to be 8,000 redundancies because we don't need these roles for AI. I think the messaging needs to be, we're looking to create high revenue, high skilled jobs for professionals to go into the sort of jobs people want to have and want to get excited in the morning to come in and do. And what we're going to use is the technology for the lower paid roles, the roles that we find there's a lot of churn anyway because people aren't happy. I think that sort of message, most people will go, that makes sense. Why would you not want to do that? Yeah.
Yeah, And ultimately, we're going to need the people, not least to be able to train, and to be able to to provide, because we're still at the stage, I think, where in terms of being able to detect phishing emails and being able to understand and see threats and understand that behaviour. I think that you can't beat that human experience, and that's going to be really essential at still being able to train, because from a maturity perspective, AI is still probably still at that toddler stage. There's so much learning and development that needs to be done, and it's having that experience from kind of qualified professionals that's going to be able to train it to make it as effective as possible.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Other thing probably worth mentioning as well, Neil, is to make sure that the AI is available to all customers, all companies, and all individuals. What I wouldn't like to see as well with the AI is that we suddenly become even more of a digital divide between
Yeah.
those that have it and those that don't. And again, that wouldn't be, well, it'd be good for the few that are making lots of money from these technologies and using them to protect themselves or to innovate. But we need to remember as well that this it'd be great if everyone is benefiting from this type of technology. And I'm not really hearing much about that. I'm not hearing around, making sure that everybody's got the same opportunities, everyone's got the same capabilities. There, as always, there'll be the few that have the premium accounts that are paying for the capabilities, that are paying for the coding add-ons that let you actually drive more value from uploading your Python or your PHP code. And then I suspect there'll be some other organizations or other individuals that are not in that space to use it. So do we create much more of a digital divide through the technology as well, potentially?
Yeah, that's definitely a concern. I think that's been highlighted in a way from something like ChatGPT, because that's been an example of where it has been, I think, a little bit more available to so many people, not just, again, businesses, not just consumers. And I think that kind of people being able to use it and get excited about it and do some fun stuff and do some really silly stuff with it. But that's been good because it's given people that exposure, and I think it's given a huge amount of people better understanding as to how some of the technology works. But then there's a lot of other stuff in the background that people are probably now beginning to realise that they don't necessarily have that access to. And I just just pitching, kind of moving over to from a cybercrime and a bad actors perspective. Things like those consumer products like ChatGPT has definitely kind of lowered the barrier to entry for a lot of cybercrime as well. Is that something where you've seen kind of more entrants coming onto the market? Has it? And I suppose there's that question of, has it? Where's the balance that it's kind of helped bad actors more? Is it in terms of scale of being able to do so much more, so much quickly, so much quicker than they ordinarily would have done, or has it been more because they've been able to do what you touched on earlier of being really granular from a spear phishing perspective, of being able to understand people in a way that they just never really were able to do before?
Yeah, the phishing's absolutely, it's totally changed spear phishing, absolutely. Malware development, we're seeing it in malware development. At the moment, it's not quite as mature, it doesn't the same level of sophistication as some of the malware that is out there that's being developed. However, it's learning all the time and it's changing all the time. And the more it gets used for developing malware, the better it will become at doing that. So we're definitely starting to see that as well. We're also seeing a thriving industry of people selling access to APIs, accessing accounts that have actually been breached or stolen and are now available on the dark web. So there's now a community that are making money from actually trading and selling access to these systems, as well as the threat actors that are using it for developing the malware, for actually breaking passwords. For example, you can go in there and you can help it to generate passwords for a persona, which actually then helps you actually use it to actually then break the passwords as well at the same time. So it's getting used for all, I would say, ingenious types of things by criminals at the same time as we're using it for ingenious things to defend ourselves. So it's across the whole myriad of everything that a threat actor touches upon. It's either been used or it's been looked at to see how they can use it.
Yeah, is it fair to say it kind of strikes me as being something that's a little bit different? Because previously, the cybersecurity industry kind of built tools and products to be able to defend and remediate networks in the face of attacks. Attackers were building their own programs and applications to be able to attack networks, to be able to build kind of bot networks, to write code and malware. Whereas now, in a way, a lot of them we're using the same tools. and obviously the bad actors are using some of those tools that they shouldn't be. They're getting access in a way that they shouldn't be. They're turning the tables on what we've got. But we're actually now, I'd say, more than we have done previously. Is that fair to say? Using the same tool set, but in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got our own. We've got some of our own AI models or engines that we developed. Checkpoint's got many that's used for years that again are maturing, but we are all using the same commercial based AI tooling as well in order to do it. So yes, absolutely, we're using the same engines to defend and to be and to attack and to go on the offensive, and that means that the AI itself is actually learning, and it's in many ways, hopefully, it learns and it knows who the goodies are and who the baddies are. But how well it does that. Well, I guess we'll soon find out. But we are using all the same tooling. We've got the same APIs in many ways.
Yeah.
We've got the same access to that same technology, and it's not just us individually. It's you then have a look at how this impacts some of the nation states, the rogue nations that are out there as well, and what they've got access to and how they're doing that. So I think it's a concerning. We're at a pivotal point, and I'm definitely very concerned to make sure that we come out on the top.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting kind of how you're building that. We talked about kind of building things like kind of or trying not to build bias and prejudice into the systems. It's the same sort of thing, I suppose, with ethics. We saw those kind of really simple examples early on of somebody saying, can you write me a piece of malware? And ChatGPT would say no, and then you'd go, if I asked you to write a piece of malware theoretically, how would you do it? And then it just wrote it, and it was like, well, okay, well that wasn't very hard. But is actually this a kind of potential point that we can build more ethical frameworks of AI being able to understand, as you said, between what's good and what's bad, could actually be a way of making sure that this is kind of, in its future development 12, 24, 36 months down the line, of actually, these systems getting a better understanding of between good and bad. But then I suppose we get onto that question of who are the goodies and who are the baddies, because that's not always kind of necessarily black and white either.
Yeah, and who polices this? Who decides what's good, what's bad? Sometimes the lines can be blurred. It's difficult to know what you're trying to do. Quite clearly, when Checkpoint research are using AI, they're keen to often use it as a threat actor as well as the defenders, because they want to use it to understand what the threat actors are doing, how they're using that technology. So on that basis, we need to use it for good and for bad, but we need to allow those that are actually trying to defend and using the technology. I guess they're the ones that should always have the priority and the access to the latest greatest features. And we need to find a way of the AI learning when it thinks that something is a threat, and I guess sort of downgrading privileges, stopping it from doing so much, reducing the learning, for example. So, but that's going to be quite difficult. Not quite sure how it does that, because how can it differentiate between a scenario when someone's trying to learn how an attacker would do something against an attacker themselves actually saying, I want to learn how to do something. The other thing I think we need to be wary as well is we need to be very wary of I guess lazy development practices. If we suddenly start to turn to AI to say, can you develop me some code to do this, and then we push that up into production, because we need to make sure that we're running the AI through code scanners so that we're able to understand any vulnerabilities. How often will it actually look to pull in libraries? Has the AI then got to be able to check to see are there critical vulnerabilities against these? Has there been any breaches associated with that code before? There's a whole lot of things that need to be built in, which is why again we need to get the groups of experts, I think, to start to take this forward and own that technology.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of whole verification piece, I think there'll probably be a strong kind of market that will build up around that, of being able to take that and verify it. But one thing that kind of occurs is AI going to be able to help us start being able to tip that balance between, there is always that kind of challenge of, what comes first in cybersecurity, and we see that kind of ebb and flow. Is it defend first, or is it proactive, or actually do we accept that we've been breached and we just need to find stuff on the market, find stuff on networks and what have you, and then kind of back to no, we assume we haven't been breached and it's all about defense. Is it going to enable kind of us collectively to be able to tip that balance to being a lot more on the front foot in terms of from a cybersecurity perspective, in terms of kind of really gonna go hunting down and being proactive to keep the bad guys out rather than just trying to kind of man the barricades.
I think it will. Checkpoint for many years have been at the forefront of what we call preventative security. So building our security models so they can stop 0 days. An example of that I'll give you will be the Log4j, Neil, that the checkpoint, if you use checkpoint physical firewalls or checkpoint WAF sitting within the cloud, before anybody realised it was a 0 day and was talking about it, the checkpoint AI actually defended against it and stopped it. It mitigated the vulnerability. You still had to patch internally, but externally you weren't vulnerable. Now, Checkpoint was the only vendor to do that. I think that as a way of defending should be the normal as we move forward. You don't want to have to defend, you don't want to have to mitigate and do things. You want the AI to get to that point where it's able to very, very quickly, within that nanosecond space, realise what that threat is and prevent that threat before it actually becomes an impact. And that's going to be quite difficult to do, but I think we're on that journey to be much more preventative.
Yeah, and I think that's part of that democratization that you talked about. That because it's not, it's a technology and it's accessing large language models and it's accessing kind of AI using kind of broader commercial tools, that potentially will be easier to build that into products that are more accessible for SMBs, possibly that don't require as much human intervention, that can require humans at the top level in terms of that verification, making that decision making. Having that decision-making capability, but will it be a way of actually giving more smaller businesses, more kind of startups, more organisations without the large budgets access to some of this kind of more advanced technology and more preventative front foot technology, rather than just relying on more kind of traditional products of just trying to block up as much as possible?
I think it will. I've no doubts that we'll start to see this technology pushing into that SMB type market, the small market for small individuals, small organisations. Checkpoint already have a large number of products in that space.
Yeah.
And the Checkpoint products actually share the same AI as the expensive products that sit in data centres. So at the moment, Checkpoint uses AI for prevention, and I'm just looking forward to seeing that AI maturing, being able to pull that chat GPT and other models into that as to how we use it much better. So that's a world I want to be in. I want to be in that world where we're preventing things. I'm not so sure I want to be in the world yet where I'm having all these conversations with avatars, with robots, with deep fakes. I'm not quite sure that's the world that I'm ready for yet. I still enjoy the personal interaction, people making decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Although having seen any of the videos and the launch materials around the metaverse, if that wasn't enough to put you off, I don't know what would. That's one of the most terrifying things I've seen. So I suppose one of the other things I just kind of wanted to touch on, and you talked again, alluded to around that kind of collectively being able to kind of work on this to make the right decisions to build the guardrails and the understanding and being able to kind of use this technology in the right way. The concept around kind of technology integrations and ecosystems, and organizations want to reduce the number of vendors, but more importantly, having their technology stack working closely together. AI seems another obvious way for kind of collectively of us as an industry to get closer to, yes, there's lots of us that, kind of technology companies are competitors, but actually being able to work closer together to be able to share this intelligence, being able to leverage all of the greater insights and understanding and visibility that we have. That seems as much an obligation as it does a commercial opportunity to be able to make products better and being able to deliver better value back to customers.
I would think so. We're not seeing that at the moment. We are in a world where, for example, if you just take the full Checkpoint portfolio, the endpoint, email, cloud, firewalls, etc., you get a full ecosystem of Checkpoint protecting things. If you then go down the space of saying, well, I want to have some competitors in that space, I want to have some network vendors in that space, I perhaps want some specialist security vendors in that space, we tend to manage all that through orchestration or through security operations via SIM. But it's been done in a space where it's looking at data, it's trying to understand data flows, but I expect that we'll get to the point where you've got competitive solutions from different vendors that are all talking in real time and learning from each other. And that's where I expect we'll get to. So rather than single vendors being able to just do that on their own, you should be able to then layer in other bits of technologies to do it. You might still get benefits from going down a single vendor route. You might find it's more cost effective. It might perform better, but I would like to think that through the use of APIs that we can connect our AI together. If we do AI together, perhaps that's the best way of defeating the threat actors using the AI against us. It's got to be a huge positive, I think.
Yeah, and I think that the technology is properly having a conversation rather than just literally, as you say, kind of data flows going backwards, backwards and forwards and pushing out instructions.
There's just little value in that. Well, there is value, but it's data, and we still need to then understand what the data is, what the trends, what the themes, what we're seeing. Try and understand what the false positives are or what's actually a threat. But ideally, as well, if we can get systems in real time all talking and learning from each other, then perhaps we can reduce the data flows we're seeing. Perhaps we get to a point we don't need SIMs. Perhaps it's the individual vendor systems that are all doing that. So again, removing that complexity from the cyber landscape can only be a good thing.
Absolutely. We're just beginning to kind of get to the top and begin to wrap up. One of the things we always kind of like to talk about, whatever subject it is, trying to kind of get a bit of an understanding as to where the trends are, where it's going, what kind of, not necessarily just look at predictions, but getting an understanding of what the roadmap looks kind of going forward. You've got the hardest job if I'm going to ask you what does the technology landscape look like for AI over the next 6, 12 or kind of 24 to 36 months? I suppose that's the challenge for us all, isn't it?
I think so. I wouldn't even try and guess what's happening in the next 2 years, 3 years, etc., because the technology is moving so fast. But I do expect it will be embedded in every security product or solution people want to take. It will start to mature. And as I said earlier, I do expect that we'll start to get alliances or groups that develop and work on things together in real term for the betterment of what's happening on the internet, which is what we're all trying to do. We want to protect our assets, protect our data, protect consumers. And that's a world that I think is going to happen. I don't think we're going to quickly get to a point where you'll just speak to your firewall and your firewall will understand what you're trying to do and make these rule sets. I still think you'll want individuals to do things, but I do think the automation will absolutely start to move forward at a very, very fast rate. And I think that's the big change we'll start to see. The remediation will start to really happen. We'll start to lower the cyber risk by understanding behavioural threats that they're actually seeing and then making very, very quick changes, much quicker than a human would be able to impact. But that's what I think is going to happen. In 3 years' time, I've got absolutely no idea. I just hope we're all around to still have these conversations, Neil.
I hope so. Although, to be honest, you've just given me an image of a bunch of analysts in a SOC room somewhere, surrounded by monitors, just shouting at their firewall, trying to get it to do things. So hopefully we're not going to end up like that. So what I'd just like to kind of finish on one thing. I suppose this again is that kind of it's not easy to know how the best approach is to be able to. We can see the opportunity, but how do we leverage it? In terms of if we had either a kind of partner listening who was looking at kind of the practical steps that they could take with their customers, or an end user, an IT professional thinking about how best that they can leverage AI or defend against the threats. What would be the kind of the one takeaway, the one next step of a kind of simple practical move that an organisation can take to be able to either defend themselves or to be able to leverage the benefits that AI could bring?
I think it's two things, Neil. The first thing I think is you need to make sure that you're providing a safe space to play with the technology. You saw that when Samsung got their fingers burnt with uploading pieces of code to help them debug issues, etc. You don't want to be pushing up any of your intellectual property into any of the bots, even if you're doing it in a bit where they're saying it's incognito mode and it won't save it. I would be just saying, don't do it. Go in a safe space, do it within either your computers that you've got sitting in home, or create a segregated place on the network. Make sure you're monitoring and managing the data that's been shared. But use the technology. It's important to start to get to use it. So that's the first thing, safe spaces. Second thing, what I would say is make sure you're understanding the impact of this technology anywhere you want to use it. So it's still the same as everything else. You still want to do your data impact assessments. You want to understand You understand the use case for why you would want to use it. You want to understand how your data has been processed, what's happening with it, and understand what the benefits of. So again, what I would still say is it's not the technology aspects. It's still doing the common sense due diligence that you would do when you're bringing any new technology into a business. It's you want to do it the same way. And if Samsung had done that, I suspect that they wouldn't have had these issues in the first place.
No, absolutely agree. Well, I think that's really good advice, and it's been a really fantastic, insightful talk. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much,
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Neil.
and thank you everybody for listening. Don't forget, watch out for the next episode wherever you get your podcast. But for today, Deryck, thank you very much.